Windows are shattering across the harbor. Nobody knows why yet. Crowds are gathering by the water. Children press their faces to glass. They're watching a ship burn, and they think it's a show. It isn't. That ship is carrying enough explosive power to level a city. Nobody on the shore knows it. Nobody on the streets knows it. Even some of the men still aboard don't fully grasp what they're standing on. The clock is ticking towards something no one in Halifax has ever seen before. And then, at 9:04 in the morning, the ship disappeared. December 6, 1917. Halifax, Nova Scotia. A cold harbor town, grey water, wartime routine. Ships move in and out constantly, ferrying soldiers, supplies, and cargo across the Atlantic toward a war still raging in Europe. It's just past 8 in the morning. People are walking to work. Children are heading to school. Nothing about this day is supposed to be different from any other. Then someone notices smoke on the water. A ship is on fire in the Narrows, the tight channel connecting the harbor to the sea. Word spreads fast. People start walking toward the waterfront instead of away from it. Office workers step outside. Dockhands stop what they're doing. Families crowd onto porches and lean out of windows, all watching the same strange, beautiful, terrible sight: flames climbing a ship's deck, black smoke curling into the winter sky. Nobody runs. Why would they? It's just a fire. Ships catch fire. This will be a story to tell at dinner. What they don't know is the name of that ship. The Mont-Blanc. And what they really don't know is what's inside it. The Mont-Blanc is a French cargo vessel, and on this morning it is, without exaggeration, one of the most dangerous objects on the planet. Packed into its hold, over 2,000 tons of picric acid, a compound more explosive than TNT. Alongside it, barrels of highly flammable benzol lashed to the deck, plus tons of TNT and guncotton buried below. It is, in effect, a floating bomb built for war, sailing quietly into a civilian harbor, with almost no outward sign of what it's carrying. No warning flags. No wide berth given. Just another gray ship among dozens of others. Minutes earlier, that ship had been moving through the Narrows on its way to join a convoy, when it crossed paths with another vessel. The Imo, a Norwegian relief ship, running behind schedule and moving faster than it should have been. In the confusion of horn signals and last-second maneuvers, the two ships misjudge each other. They turn the wrong way at the same moment. The Imo's bow slices into the Mont-Blanc's hull. The impact itself is almost survivable. A gash in the metal. Nothing catastrophic, not yet. But that gash opens directly into barrels of benzol. Fuel spills. Sparks ignite from the scraping metal. And fire begins to climb the deck of a ship loaded with more explosive material than anyone standing on shore could imagine. The crew of the Mont-Blanc understands immediately what almost nobody else does. They know exactly what's in that hold. And they know there is nothing they can do to stop what's coming. They abandon ship. They row for shore, screaming warnings in French that most people on the docks can't understand. Some witnesses later say they saw the men rowing frantically and assumed they were simply panicking over a fire. Nobody grasps the real danger. The burning, drifting Mont-Blanc floats closer to the Halifax pier, closer to the docks, the rail yards, the packed streets of a working-class neighborhood called Richmond. And still, the crowd grows. Office windows fill with faces. Sailors on nearby ships stop to watch. A crowd gathers almost like it's a public event, because as far as they know, it is one. Nobody in that crowd knows they are staring directly at a bomb with a lit fuse. At 9:04 a.m., the fire reaches the Mont-Blanc's cargo. The explosion that follows is, to this day, considered one of the largest man-made explosions in history before the nuclear age. In a fraction of a second, the ship simply ceases to exist. A fireball rips into the sky, followed by a shockwave that flattens everything in its path. Windows shatter across the city. Some accounts describe glass fragments blinding people who were watching from what they believed was a safe distance. The blast wave moves faster than sound, faster than warning, faster than anyone could possibly react. Buildings collapse instantly. The Richmond district, packed with homes, factories, and schools, is essentially wiped off the map in seconds. A wall of water rises from the harbor, a tsunami triggered by the force of the blast, surging onto the shoreline and sweeping away anything still standing. Metal from the Mont-Blanc rains down miles away. A piece of the ship's anchor, weighing thousands of pounds, is later found over 2 miles from where the ship had been. In an instant, roughly 2,000 people are dead or dying. 9,000 more are injured, many blinded permanently by flying glass as they stood at their windows, drawn to a fire they thought was simply a spectacle. Then comes the fires. Then comes the cold. It's December in Nova Scotia, and survivors, many of them children, are trapped under rubble, exposed to freezing temperatures, as what's left of the city tries to understand what just happened. To make the horror worse, a blizzard rolls in the very next day, dumping snow on a city with no shelter, no power, and thousands of injured people lying in makeshift hospitals, churches, and private homes turned into emergency wards overnight. Word of the disaster spreads by telegraph, and one city responds faster and harder than any other: Boston. Within hours, trains loaded with doctors, nurses, and medical supplies are moving north. Massachusetts sends relief that becomes so significant, so lasting, that Halifax still sends Boston a Christmas tree every single year, over a century later, as a quiet thank you that has never stopped. In the aftermath, questions turn to blame. Who caused the collision? The Mont-Blanc, or the IMO? Investigations, trials, and appeals stretch on for years, with responsibility ultimately shared and never fully resolved to everyone's satisfaction. In the end, no one was ever definitively convicted, and Halifax was left not with closure, but with grief. What remains isn't just a story about a ship. It's a story about how close ordinary life sits next to catastrophe. How a Tuesday morning, an office window, a child's curiosity, can turn into the last moments of a life, without a single person knowing it. The people of Halifax didn't see a warship. They didn't see a weapon. They saw smoke on the water, and they did what people do: they watched. And for 2,000 of them, that morning in December became the only warning they would ever get. But the story of Halifax doesn't end with the explosion. In the hours after the blast, the city becomes almost impossible to recognize. Streets that had been filled with workers and children are buried beneath shattered wood, twisted metal, broken glass, and burning debris. People walk through the ruins calling out names. Parents search for children. Children search for parents. And some survivors are still trapped beneath collapsed buildings, waiting in the freezing darkness for someone to hear them. There is no modern emergency response system capable of handling a disaster of this scale. Hospitals are overwhelmed almost immediately. Doctors and nurses work without enough supplies, without enough space, and sometimes without even knowing whether their own families are alive. The cold makes everything worse. Halifax is in the middle of winter. Temperatures drop, and thousands of people who have lost their homes are suddenly exposed to freezing conditions. Then, as if the explosion itself wasn't enough, another disaster arrives. A massive snowstorm strikes the city the following day. Snow covers the streets and the ruins. For people trapped beneath collapsed buildings, the storm becomes a race against time. For rescuers, it makes an already impossible job even harder. But help is already moving north. In Boston, news of the explosion spreads quickly. The city responds almost immediately. Doctors, nurses, medical equipment, food, clothing, and other supplies are gathered. A relief train is organized and sent toward Halifax. It becomes one of the most important rescue efforts in the city's history. The people of Halifax never forget it. And more than 100 years later, they still remember Boston's help in a remarkable way. Every Christmas, Halifax sends Boston a Christmas tree. Not as a celebration of the disaster, but as a symbol of gratitude. A reminder that when Halifax was at its darkest moment, another city crossed the border to help. But while rescuers were treating the injured, another question was beginning to dominate the city. Who was responsible? How could two ships collide in the middle of the harbor? Why was the Mont-Blanc allowed to enter Halifax carrying such an enormous amount of explosives, and could the disaster have been prevented? Investigators began examining every detail. The movements of the Mont-Blanc, the actions of the MO, the signals between the ships, the decisions made by their captains. Every mistake became important because the explosion had not been caused by a single moment alone. It had been a chain of a ship moving too quickly, a misunderstanding, a wrong turn, a collision, a spark, and finally, an explosion powerful enough to destroy an entire part of a city. And they would spend the rest of their lives remembering the morning when everyone looked toward the harbor. And nobody realized they were looking at death.